you shouldn't be interesting, you should be
interested.
Sometimes I think, why did I go to Oxford and do an MBA? Because it's been 25 years, nobody has ever asked me for this certificate. Probably 90% of the biggest things that have happened in your life is pure chance.
Hello, Namaskar. Welcome to another episode of Thought in a Dot, where we traverse the various worlds of content, connection, and communication, and how we can take inspiration from these to our own lives. And today we have a global stand-up sensation who has made it a mission to spread laughter across the world. He's someone who inspires us with his wit, wisdom, stories, both on and off the stage. He is one of those people who's really close to my heart. And I often call him the Chief Kindness Officer because he is the kindest soul when it comes to connecting people, collaborating with them, and also spreading the message of happiness. No, he's not a saint, but a stand-up comic, an executive coach, and a dear friend. Please welcome Papa CJ. CJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
As I just mentioned, the show revolves around the themes of content, connection, and communication. But throughout my career span, what worked for me was these three pillars. Content, as both of us come from the world of storytellers, and you being one of our favorite, helps you in communicating your story well. Nobody else can teach you communication the way CJ does. You should go and check out his latest post as well, which was retweeted by none other than Shashi Tharoor himself regarding writing. Coming to the third pillar, which is basically connections. हिंदी में कहें तो किस्से, कहानी और किरदार जिनसे हमारी पूरे जीवन की कहानी ओवरलैप करती रहती है. वैसे ही शो के अंदर भी we don't define sections. Just like life, all of this also overlaps in the show. I would like to know, in your life, what is more important out of these three pillars when it comes to
100% connection.
Okay.
Because content and communication are just means to an end, and that end is connection. I think that's what we're all aiming for. And far beyond anything to do with work, I believe that the whole purpose of life itself is to connect with other human beings, to connect with yourself. If you look at all the surveys on happiness, and I think there's a Harvard study on happiness which has gone on for 80 years, and it's looked at beyond it doesn't matter what your income group is, your social status is, etc., and across countries. It says the most important criteria for living a happy life is the quality of your relationships.
CJ, when it comes to the word connections, for you at a given point and in a given room, it means a different meaning, according to me. If I was to elaborate, on stage, the connection you have with the audience is a different connection. Today, we are sitting here, we have a different connection. When you are in a room full of the kindness projects that you take up, the happiness project that you call, there's a different connection. How do you define yourself and switch from one connection to another?
Firstly, I don't define myself. I don't think I need to be put in a box, or any human being needs to be put in a box. I don't think you should define yourself by profession or any other filter for that matter. Also, I think a lot of what you've asked me to respond to is not as planned and as thought out as other people may perceive.
Okay.
A lot of it just comes naturally. I think when you're on the spot, you do what is required in that room. There isn't a formula, there isn't a standard way. You keep trying different things. If you don't connect instantly, if one thing doesn't work, you try something else. If that doesn't work, you try a third thing. But I think the most important person when you're trying to connect with a human being is to always make it about them and not about yourself. If you can, there's that saying, right? You shouldn't be interesting, you should be interested. So if you're interested in the other person, I think one of the things people overlook when thinking about communication is that one of the most important parts of communication is being a good listener. But we tend to think, oh, communication is about what I say, how I. Once you listen, if you listen well, then you are armed much better and prepared much better to actually communicate and speak and get your message across, because you can customize it based on what the other person cares about.
You said you don't put yourself in a box and you try to be interested. And that's really true for CJ, because whenever he's visiting various cities, he actually makes an effort of, I'm just part of one of the groups that he's on. He actually makes an effort and says, okay, this time slot is free. Would you want to come and meet? He makes that extra effort. It's not that he's saying that it comes naturally to him. Of course, it comes naturally to him, but he makes an effort to connect with different people and meet them. Why are you so interested in people?
I think so I'm very curious, not just curious by nature, but I like human beings. I'm deeply interested in what motivates them, what makes them tick, how they think. I think it was a Steve Jobs quote that creativity is connecting the dots. But I believe that curiosity is collecting the dots.
Oh, wow.
And the more dots you collect, the more dots you have to connect. And also, the more you learn about a subject, or more you learn about a person, that dot becomes a circle. And the magic lies in the areas where those circles overlap, because those are spaces where you have unique knowledge. If I was to think about my own example, I've done 20 years of stand-up comedy, but I've also done 17 years of leadership coaching. Now, one of the most popular modules I teach is called A Comedian's Guide to Storytelling Strategy. So that has taken the worlds of storytelling and comedy and leadership and communication, and what I'm offering people is something that is right in the center of all those. Where all
it's
those
like that Venn diagram we used to study in
it's
school.
Exactly that. It's exactly that Venn diagram. So I genuinely believe that there is no knowledge or no learning which is wasted, because if you have the ability to just step back and see how you can form connections between the various kinds of knowledge you have, I think there's immense power and magic there. So I'll give you an example from a completely different field, right? And this has a relationship to leadership.
Sure.
So if you think about an orchestra, what happens in an organization? Somebody is a really good saxophonist playing in that orchestra, and you say, oh, this person's a really good saxophonist. But what do? You suddenly make that person the conductor. You make that person the manager. Now, they may be really good at their job, and you've promoted them to a manager, which requires a completely different skill set, whereas they should be a senior saxophonist. But the problem is, in many organizations, the only career path is a singular one, which is not necessarily catered to the skills and talents of that individual or their interests. They may not want to be a manager, but you have told them that in order for you to succeed, you have to be a manager. That is the next level. Right? So I found that very interesting, the analogy with music, with an orchestra.
Right.
That if somebody is a good saxophonist, that doesn't mean you make him a conductor.
True. When you communicate to senior leaders of organization, what you just said is a very usual part and parcel in a corporate setup. For someone to say that out loud and call it out is not an easy job. How do you break into the mind of a leader when you are trying to tell things like this?
See, firstly, the word tell doesn't really apply, because leaders don't like to be told things.
Interesting, right?
Also, no leader wants gyan. Most leaders think that they know everything anyway. So, when you work as a coach, your job is to simply, firstly, engage them and get their interest. It is very hard to grab and retain the attention of a senior leader who has traveled the world, seen a lot. So the first objective is to engage them, and the second objective is to simply open up their mind to different ways of thinking. I'm never giving them answers. I'm simply giving them a different lens with which to look at their own life and their own challenges and their own work.
And you're asking the right questions.
I'm asking the right questions. It's not about the answers at all. And if I tell somebody something, or if I give them an answer, they're not going to be motivated to do anything about it, right? But if they can form that mental connection for themselves, saying, "Arey, this is interesting. Why don't I try this?" Then you've got something going.
So coaching is not about telling or...
Coaching is very far from telling. It is anything but telling.
So can we call it guiding? Is that also something
So
like a misnomer?
if I was to give you a simple example of leadership coaching analogy, this is your current reality, this is your future ideal self, and we take your strengths and get you from here to there. That's the very simple, basic nature of it. Now, your current reality, the first thing is we're getting you aware. How am I thinking? How am I behaving? What are my habits? What are my limiting beliefs? So there is that sense of awareness. Second thing is we are actually painting a picture of what this future ideal self is, right? What is that 15 years down the line where you want to be? Now that picture is also painted based on your values. So first you have to look inwards. What are my values? How does that translate into a life that I want? And then you're looking at your strengths. What are my strengths and how can I best use my strengths to get me from where I am to where I want to be? You know?
CJ, we ask that a lot when we see your career graph. How did you do this? Because the natural flow that you just said, a stand-up comedy to an executive coach is not a natural flow for a common man. Okay. So tell me, how did that switch happen?
See, the switch happened. I started comedy in London in 2004.
Yeah.
Right. I was the only Indian comedian in the entire country. I always try to represent India in a positive light. The first line I wrote was, "Don't mess with us Indians. We come from the land of the Kama Sutra. We can F you in more ways than you can count." Right. And in my first 10 months, I did 250 shows. After that, I went broke. So I used to work in the day and perform at night. I worked for a firm a recruitment firm. We used to hire kids out of Oxford and Cambridge and put them in consulting firms.
Yeah, but CJ, I don't know. I don't think anybody doesn't know him on the show. He's already a very big name, but he is one of the most padha likha stand-up you'll ever see. He comes from Oxford Business School.
It's okay. It's quite interesting. Sometimes I think, why did I go to Oxford and do an MBA? Because it's been 25 years, nobody has ever asked me for this certificate.
Yeah.
So when I was in that recruitment firm, one of my clients did leadership coaching.
Okay.
So that got me very excited. So I started in 2007. So I used to, on the days I didn't have shows, I would tell them I'm free on these days, get me work. So they would say, okay, Google wants to run this workshop in Ireland. Nike wants to do this in the Netherlands. UBS wants to do this in Switzerland. So I was balancing both the comedy and the coaching. And it's almost like comedy was a drug, and the coaching was supporting my comedy habit, so to say. So I was saying it started in 2007. Then I moved back to India in 2008. There was no English language comedy circuit. I remember I met an aunt and she said, "Beta, tum kya karte ho?"
मैं जोक सुनाता हूँ.
I said, "Auntie, मैं comedian हूँ, मैं जोक सुनाता हूँ." So she said, "Beta, जोक तो मैं भी सुनाती हूँ."
I remember reading this in Naked. Yeah.
So anyway, the circuit started, and then when COVID happened, then comedy took a bit of a hit because you can't be firing people and then hiring a comedian to come and tell jokes. Right? So then I decided to focus a little bit more on the coaching. Also, I found that as I get older, I don't enjoy being in the spotlight as much as I do helping other people shine. So I don't want to be the center of attention, but if by virtue of anything that I do, somebody else is able to succeed and find joy and whatever else it may be, that gives me
so basically joy. CJ is an enabler. He wants things to happen.
Whatever technical term you might. See, frankly speaking, I think if we look at all of our lives, probably 90% of the biggest things that have happened in your life is pure chance. That if you think of your own life, right, a lot of it is just chance. It's being true. You just happen to be at a certain place at a certain time and something comes in front.
Yep.
In fact, I believe the greatest skill you require to succeed today is your ability to adapt to change.
Stand-up also in India, the way we know it, is something that you have been a very important part of facilitating. And again, sorry for using the technical term, being an enabler to actually create an environment that supported stand-ups. You have never talked about it openly. I have seen other podcasts also. I've never seen a mention, but I read the book. You actually facilitated and I don't know how, I'm forgetting how many years you ran that entire setup for in Delhi.
So,
And please tell us about it.
I started the comedy circuit. So I moved back to India early 2008. I did 2 national tours, multiple cities in India in 2008 itself. And then early 2009, I started off the English language comedy circuit in Delhi, much before the comedy store had
Yeah,
come to
exactly.
India and
Kuch
things
nahi
like
aaya
that.
tab tak.
There was nothing going on. And my role was to create a safe space. See, comedy is not easy to do. And the first few times you do have a bad show. Now, if you have a bad show and you are not supported at that point, your spirit dies. And if your spirit dies, you will never get back on stage. So my job was to ensure that I created that safe space. I used to host the nights. If a comedian had a bad gig, we still gave them a round of applause. If somebody decided to heckle and give that comic a hard time, I would take care of that heckler. So I would either put them down or I would say, you think it's so easy? You get up on stage. And that person would get up for 2 minutes, make a fool of themselves, and then I would get them to go back and sit down. So that was a role I did play. And then eventually what happens is, I remember the first few nights, my friend Dipali Gupta, who used to run this bar called Mocha Bar, part of Riaz Amlani's impresario group. And small space. And we'd have all sorts of, we didn't know how many comedians we would get. So we had jugglers, we had poets, we had singers, we had...
It was almost like an open mic.
It was an open mic,
yeah.
And I remember a lot of these guys doing their first gigs in front of me, Abhish Mathew, Raghav Mandava. But it was a very raw time, and there was a purity to it.
Hunger to it.
Not just hunger, there was a purity in that we were enjoying the art, right? We were enjoying all being in the same place, struggling and sort of figuring out how to do this.
The entire process.
Whereas now it is all very polished and commercial and career oriented. It's about, how many views I'm going to get, right? And a lot of stuff now is I'm going to shoot this set and stick it on the net. I have released this video, So, I mean, see, all due respect to people who are doing that, they're very successful, 1,000 times more successful than me. In fact, I sometimes call myself the most famous comedian who nobody knows because I'm an analog man in a digital world, right? I love the live art form of stand-up, but I have never made the effort to build a following, to focus on Instagram or YouTube or, And also, I'm not drawn to fame. The nature of our profession is that you happen to be in the limelight, but I love being anonymous. I love the fact that I can talk to the panwala, sit in a taxi, walk down the road. I would hate to be, have the life of Shah Rukh Khan. As much as Shah Rukh, I admire him to bits, and he loves his life. I think I've heard him speak. He's a phenomenal speaker. And he talks about his greatest fear being that one day I will wake up and I will not be recognized because he's worked his whole life to become that person.
True.
Whereas my greatest fear, it's probably not my greatest fear, is that I'll be recognized everywhere. Right? So I like anonymity.
You like the anonymity.
But yeah, I think the early days of stand-up was just a really beautiful time. And then what happens is, as comedians start getting better, they start hosting their own nights so that they can get more stage time.
Right.
And then once the circuit started to build, then I wasn't required at the grassroots level anymore. So then I started doing a lot more corporate shows because I figured if I had to put food on the table, so that's where the money was. But yeah, I think the early days of stand-up were very enjoyable, and I'll always be grateful for the small part I played in creating a stand-up comedy circuit.
Creating a safe space for them. I remember उस time Hindi comedians के लिए फिर भी there was something. But English comics, stand-up comics के लिए कुछ भी नहीं था, because at that time we had those Tea Time Manoranjan and Raju Srivastava and all of them coming up slightly on Indian television somewhere.
In fact, what's really interesting is that my memory is terrible, but now I start getting reminded of the various different things that happened. I was listening to a podcast where my friend Amit Tandon was on it. And he was talking about how I got him his first corporate show, right? And that's when he flew in a fancy aircraft, stayed in a 5-star hotel,
So
got paid
nice.
to do stand-up. And he was like, "Yaar, ye bhi hota hai?" Now, I had completely forgotten about
Of
that.
course.
Then there was another comic who had got a job offer at Deloitte. And Deloitte was a client of mine for comedy. And he was based in Gurgaon or Delhi, and very talented comedian. I thought he had great potential. But his job offer was in Hyderabad. And there wasn't an English comedy circuit going on there, or any comedy circuit for that matter. I spoke to the CEO. That year, 16 graduates got placed in Hyderabad, and he was the only one whose job was posted in Gurgaon.
Wow.
There was another guy who I thought was really talented, and I literally asked him. I said, "You tell me what your monthly expenses are at home, right? If you don't cover it, I will cover it. But you need to focus on stand up because you're so talented." And touchwood, he's a very successful comic now. But I forget all these things. I have no memory of them because
and that's the beauty of it, right?
That's just age, I think. Also, sometimes there are just so many tabs open, I can never remember what's gone at the back. I can remember what's sort of coming up. Coming back to your question, it was just a beautiful time, Zakir is one of the most successful comedians in our country today. I have seen him at a time where he was doing 5 minutes, right? And to see how he's grown, and I get such great joy from seeing people succeed. I don't get this. I don't understand competitiveness. I don't think, especially in an artistic field, there is anything called competition, because nobody can be a better version of you, right? So you just have to be you. True. So it gives me such great joy to see people who have sort of started out in front of me, who are just rocking it. It's and over the years, it's always one person who breaks out. Zakir broke out at one point. Amit broke out at one point. In the UK, Sindhu V suddenly broke out at one point. So it gives me,
immense joy.
I just love seeing it.
He's Papa CJ is right now looking like a proud papa.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Just focus on those emotions. He's like, okay, I'm like this proud father. Nice. Are you going through a similar phase again while you are, you're doing these shows in Delhi right now, trying out material?
To be honest, Riddhi, I'm in a space where I'm incredibly fortunate. I think the word people like to use now is privileged. In that, luckily, I don't have to do what I do to put food on the table. Of course, yeah. I think now, luckily, I'm in a place where I can choose to do the things that give me joy.
So I think that was a beautiful conversation.
Very intense for a conversation with a comedian. Huh?
Yeah, it was very intense, and I wasn't. The questions I had were completely different, by the way. And I told him that I'm not going to stick to them. And diving into the mind of a stand-up comic would be something like this. मुझे नहीं पता था for sure.
See, but again, you put me in a box. Stand-up comic.
Bhai.
Yeah.
Diving into the mind of our beloved Papa CJ would be something like this. I did not know. And I'm glad that this conversation took various twists and turns from life to present to past to future. Okay, so thank you so much, CJ, for being here.
My pleasure.
And I hope you also enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
Absolutely.
And if you have any parting message for our followers, please do give them, other than the like, subscribe.
Yeah, the only parting message is this, that the only reason I'm here is because Riddhi is absolutely fantastic. She's one of the people I admire the most for her ability to care for other people, but also the kind of hard work she puts in and the kind of work she does for the community and for other people is just deeply inspiring to me.